Hey, welcome to episode 4 of the Summit series, the podcast where we interview some of the top technology leaders and share insights from them. In this episode, Dan and I spoke with Kunal Madhav. Kunal is a CTO and co-founder of a medical startup called MedTribe that was part of Techstars London and is going big guns at the moment. And his previous career includes working for some of the fastest growing startups and scale-ups across Australia, including Xero, Delegate, Connect, Flipper, and most recently was the Chief Technology Officer at Good Human. We spoke about so many different areas, but a few of the insights I think listeners will get a lot of value from is Kunal's experiences in startups. He talks about it in detail, and we really appreciated how honest he was about some of the experiences that he's had, and hopefully you can avoid some of these pitfalls. And then the other thing is just his philosophy on leadership, how he runs teams, and some awesome stuff around building product, that relationship between product, engineering, design, that kind of healthy tension he talks about. How do you get the best out of that team, and how do they work together to get the most out of building great products? I really hope you enjoy this episode with myself, Dan, and Kunal. Awesome. So we start every conversation with the same question. Kunal, what are some of the earliest experiences that you can remember that have shaped you to be either the person or the leader that you are today?
Okay, yeah, great question. I don't know if it's a common trend or not, but the things that are the earliest things that shape me into the way I operate from a leadership or management standpoint is bad experiences, funny enough, in my early career where it was typically bad managers. I don't know if it's a bit of a bad term to use, but I can still remember the scenarios like that I was in this, the feelings I had even to this day. And we're talking like 10 odd years ago. And it's a case where you don't really remember all the good times. You always remember all the bad times and you want to learn from that. And so I think I learned a lot, not at the time, it didn't feel like it, but looking back, I really valued being poorly managed, being part of teams and leaders who I now believe weren't doing the right thing at that time, but at that time I didn't have any experience, no better. And then also being part of it, there was a scenario where I was part of a team where it wasn't a manager or say, but the way the team operated. And the short story about it was I unfortunately at that company created a small production incident, and you go into crisis mode and you're going to do all the things you need to do. And it was my first time ever having that scenario happen to me as a software engineer. And there was a technical leader who then, funny enough, became my manager 6 months later. But at that time in the crisis was finger pointing. So instead of corralling the team together and crisis managing, go, how do we fix it? Let's worry about postmortem and blame and all those kinds of things and how we fix it later. Let's just worry about fixing it now. But no, pointing the finger, you wrote bad code, you didn't test it, you didn't do this. And even to this day, I can feel that sinking feeling in my stomach of like, that is not what you do to anyone when something goes wrong. And as I was saying before, he became my manager later on, and he was no better as a manager. But I had a couple of other managers in my time who was similar in that regard. But I still remember those experiences and remember saying to myself, if I ever go down the path of being a leader, team leader, a manager, or whatever in the future, I never ever want anyone in the most vulnerable point of their time in the day where they've done something potentially wrong to feel like that, because that's lasting. And people say it lasts forever. I can tell you, like, yeah, it's 10 years, 12 years now, and I still remember what I was wearing, where I was standing, and how I was feeling to this moment. And I'll never want anyone else to go through that. So a long-winded answer for you guys to let you know that like those bad experiences really, really shaped me. And I think it helped grow some my ability to be real empathetic to others when they're going through something quite bad, or it's not just bad times, but that's when you really need to be a good leader, I believe. It's when someone's struggling through work or personal situations and being able to understand it, even if it's against what the business wants or what you want. Got to treat people properly. And so, yeah, I think those early experiences, my first 2 jobs, those 2 things happened. So it was really, really early in my career. So thankful that it happened, but not at the time when it did happen.
Yeah, oh, wow, that must have been pretty intense if you can remember those kind of details about the experience.
It was, yeah, traumatizing for sure. And it's funny because like looking back at it now, it wasn't even that big of a deal. But it's the way, and the incident was resolved. We're talking like, 15 minutes of outage and it's all back in happy days, and no business revenue loss, nothing like that. It was just like a bug that was caused. I remember all those details, and it's this traumatizing effect that it has on you. And it's like, it's more the emotional attachment to it rather than the actual work that went wrong with it. So, but I also never forget that manager and never want to work with them ever again either. So it's not a good scenario all up.
How do you think you would give advice to younger people, like say going earlier in their career like you were? How I always kind of try to coach people to, in an interview situation, treat it as you're interviewing them as well as them interviewing you. Like it's a two-way street. You want it to be a win-win and a scenario that's working for both sides. How would you kind of, or how have you formed a bit of a guide for people or advice for people to, I don't know, I guess like try to avoid accepting a job in that kind of situation, or managers or leaders that, how do you vet them at the beginning before you even accept the role? What do you think?
Vet them as them becoming managers, sorry, or
well, if you're say applying for a role at a company and you're being interviewed by a leader, how do you kind of validate whether they're a good leader or not, I guess is the question.
I guess it's leading questions around, have you had, from my experience, have you had incidents before? What processes, or if any, do you have at play that help with that scenario? I guess what most people will do is look at Glassdoor and things like that and try and get a feel for what the company is like. But I don't think I've yet got a good set of template questions where I can really dig and that person's a great leader. I do rely heavily on my gut and my intuition. And as an example, when I was applying, for Good Human, there was a multi-stage process to be at that company, and I got successful to the offer stage, but I wasn't convinced that it was still the right CEO. And funny enough, I was still wrong end of the day. But I went ahead and said, can I have one more chat with you? And I just had some questions that I had that were specific to the company. As I was saying before, I have been fooled by salesmen, CEOs before, and I got fooled again. But I think, Dan, to answer your question, I think I use my gut intuition, to be honest. And then in that scenario, I was like, I wasn't convinced that this is as good as you're making it sound. So I had a few dedicated questions to go ask and find it out. But I guess going into that, when I look for other leaders and things, is I think something that I need to learn is be not so trustworthy too early on. I think I'm getting forward more on that path. But I think it's something I do need to work on, which is, do I have a set of template questions I can ask and trying to weed these leaders out and beforehand? But the other tactic I've used is, if I know someone who works at that company, I try and find out more information and what the culture's like and how they operate and things. But yeah, so far I kind of just wing it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think with yourself, it's extremely difficult, because what I get from you is that you care deeply about what you do. So I don't know if it's that you get fooled as much as that you buy into the passion and how much the founder, the CEO loves the product or loves what they're doing, and that seems to be extremely important to you, and you've just been maybe unlucky to work with people that might say one thing but do something completely different, right? Imagine if you found a role where the founder was like how you are as a founder, right?
Yeah.
Then it would be completely different, right? You care a lot and you care about people, and you sort of maybe miss some of the signs that you might otherwise see if you weren't as emotionally invested.
Yeah, that's spot on, Chris. That is exactly it. I feel when I'm applying for a role and I'm getting through the process and I like the company, the product and the mission that they're on, the blinders kind of come on a little bit. And I think that's the skill I need to learn. It's about it's all great to have the positive things, but try and focus on the not so good things, or potentially not so good things. But it's hard. You get excited by something. It's a new opportunity and you want to put your best foot forward and assume that they're doing the right thing. But, such as life, things don't work out that way, unfortunately.
I think also it might be naive. Most people are doing the right thing, and you win more than you lose. Sometimes you can end up in situations that you look back and you've learned from it. But I'm assuming what you learned by what not to do as a manager or leader, you've taken into the founder position. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that's the beauty of having those bad, if I call them bad experiences, is you can read books and all the things you're supposed to do, but I feel like the most learning I've ever had is in the crisis situations and the times where things haven't gone your way, and how how I reacted in those scenarios and how I would react as a leader and how you watch other people react as leaders. And that shapes you, because then you go, if this scenario was to happen ever again and I was in a different position, what would I do differently? And I think I put a lot of onus on how people feel in those scenarios as well. And I think that's what I find that quite important, to make sure people are feeling, it's a stressful time when crisis and things happen, but you want to make sure people are feeling okay, and then you can get out of it. Because I think any situation that's a crisis can be fixed, but you don't want to have any lasting effects like it's happened to me, unfortunately.
How do you balance like the tension maybe between, like you did just mention it briefly, where you were talking about looking after people, how that may align to the business or to other factors going on. How do you balance that world? How do you look after people and at the same time have outcome delivery
Pressures.
for the business? Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's the age old can you work faster and harder but take care of your people problem. I think I've been fortunate enough where in the scenarios that I've been a part of and the companies I've worked with, where there's always delivery pressures, but I've always spent a fair bit of time, especially in the early days when I've come into a company or as a leadership position, is setting up good processes and ways of working. And so that there is that flex, so to speak, in taking care of people, which is people take leave or need a break here and there. And you're not 100% all the time. And I know it's hard to sell that to a CEO or a founder and go, "Oh, my team's not working 100%." It's not a case of we're slacking off either, but it's just having a recognition that there needs to be, I hate percentages, but let's call it 10% flex in there, just for people's personal lives, things to take over. People, I'm feeling it today, need a mental health day. Some people are really killing it today, or other weeks they're not. Whereas if you've got delivery pressures that are requiring 100% of your time, I believe in the short term, you're going to be okay. People are passionate, work hard, but you're going to start getting burnout. People are going to start to lose motivation, and we fundamentally need a bit of a break from time to time. And if we're going 100% of the time, it doesn't work. And so the way I practice that or put into some sort of operational way is working with the leadership on the roadmap and the way we're planning things out, and adding some buffer. And I know it sounds really bad to say keep putting buffer zones in here and there, but it's just being aware that is something that actually is required, and that as humans we all need this, and recognizing that is something that needs to happen. Now, CEOs may or may not believe that that's the case, and so as a technology leader, as in the CTO or manager position, it's just recognizing what your team's strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and what they need to accomplish that. And I think I was fortunate enough to learn that very, very early when I became a team leader many moons ago at a first company, where I tried all these things out and it worked out well for that team. And I think that was really cool. And that's lasted with me as well to this day.
Yeah, that's good. How do you, I guess this would mean that you need, like some of the things you've described sound like a formula for working with a CEO or in your role, and kind of partnering where you're leading the technology, but you need this certain type of relationship for I guess your leadership style to be successful, your people to be successful. You need to create like a certain environment. What do you think is important, or what do you view as like some of the important factors in that kind of relationship between a CTO and a CEO? What have you seen kind of work together that's worked really well?
Building trust, I think, is probably one of the first things I would say. My previous experiences haven't been that well in that regard, but initially building that trust between, so as a CTO, trust that I've got the engineering technology side of the business sorted and can manage all those kinds of things. And I trust the CEO will do all the CEO needs to do. But having that mutual respect as well, being able to understand that. Where it's failed before is where it would fail, I guess, for most people, is a micromanager style CEO who's always wants to know the details and wants to know these kinds of things. So I think trust is a big thing. And really part of that is open communication as well. You can't always be friends when it comes to these things, but you also need to have good open lines of communication and constant wherever relevant. And just having that mutual respect and trust, I think, has been really, really powerful. And I think that's helped me in my roles when I've been in these roles to succeed as it is. And I believe it's helped the CEOs as well not worry so much, say, about the technology or the product side of the business, because it's been taken care of.
It sounds like you're a very open kind of person and personality. And it also sounds like that you're what you've mentioned, there's been a number of failures or of areas that have been quite difficult situations. How do you still maintain a positive view of an openness where you're stepping into new opportunities, but you have these kind of experiences? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question and assessment. I don't think if I was to go for a role at another company, it's not fair on that company to take the baggage that comes with me in my emotional state versus the previous companies, but the learnings I've taken from it. Not every CEO and founder is the same, and so I don't think it'd be fair for me to kind of treat them all the same in that regard. But I know, and as Chris, what you were saying before, if I was to find a CEO or a founder who would operate like me, it would be fantastic. And so I want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they are working in the way that they want to work, and I can adapt to it. Because I think even with my past experiences, I don't think it's necessarily something that I need to change to make that would have prevented those scenarios from happening. I think what it needs to be is me going forward is learning from it and asking, next time I go for an interview, for example, is there enough runway for a year? Can we pay our staff? If we're going to grow to say, you want to grow the engineering team 10x, can we actually forecast and afford to do that for a year or two, whatever time frame we're looking at? And, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Those are the questions I probably should have asked sooner at the previous company that I did this at. So it's that learnings I'll take ahead, but still want to go with the way I am, the way I'm built, the way I want to operate with that person and give them the best shot to work with me as well.
It's interesting, that scenario you mentioned about in a startup type of environment, the plans for the future. I know. So I'm a CTO of a startup, and I know sometimes people will ask me in interviews, similar questions to that, right? What's the plan? What's the runway? What's the roadmap? And admittedly, a lot of my answers are kind of vague and maybe not very substantial. I mostly excuse it as, well, we plan 3 months ahead is probably the horizon. Even that though can change. Change, I guess, is an inevitable part of startup life. But I do tell people, look, I can't tell you what will be here in 12 months. I think I did say to somebody, the only thing I can absolutely tell you is that change will be a thing in 12 months' time. But anything beyond that is very hard to pin down. How do you deal with that situation? I guess from both sides, like there's probably two parts of the question, I guess. One is, how do you deal with that when you're going into a new business and you're trying to assess that for, accepting a role? How do you also do it when you're kind of you're the interviewer and people are asking you that question?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in a very peculiar situation where if I was to go for a role next somewhere else, I think the pendulum, I'm swinging it quite the opposite direction, which is when I go to a CEO, how much runway have you got? Can you pay me? Can you pay us? And I think it's just a reaction to what I've just come from. But if I'm thinking about when I was to go to, before I joined Good Human, the questions were similar, Dan, when I was asking, what are your rough plans? Are we going for funding this year? Like, it's not like I need to know dollar by dollar what we're actually going to make, because there's a startup, and, are we going to die next week? I'd like to know that. But if we're going to die in 6 months' time, well, that's a startup. It's kind of part of the journey. So I think it's just at the moment, my particular view on the world is a little bit skewed towards one side, given the recent events. But I think when that goes past, it's very much just getting a rough indication from the CEO or founder about where things are at and what the plans are. At least know that there is some sort of plan rather than we're just winging it. I think that will make me very, very uncomfortable. But if we've got a rough idea that, 6 months from now, we're going to go for funding at this kind of thing is where I'd be. As an interviewer, actually, when at the previous company, we grew the engineering team quite substantially. And that is a question that gets asked. It wasn't so much about the financial side of the business. It was more the roadmap and the product plans, because the company and the teams were growing. And so it was very much what you said, Dan. In my first 2 months there, I actually formulated that plan. Okay, for engineering, this is what we're going to look like roughly in 3 months' time. This is the plan that I'm executing it. And this is, I got about 80 to 90% confidence that this is what we're going to get to. I've got a similar plan for about 6 months from now as well, which I'm about 50-50 confident on what we're going to do. It all depends. And there was a plan for beyond that, and I was literally like, maybe not happening. It all depends on how the first 2 iterations go. And so the way that I approach it for candidates is say, this is where my confidence level is at the next quarter. 2 quarters from now, this is what I'm aiming to get us to. Beyond that, I'm just putting a finger in the air, but I've got a rough idea of what we're trying to go to, and it all depends on how we go from there. So because candidates do understand it is a startup, change isn't inevitable, as you say. Not only changing the roadmap, the processes, the company direction, but also people coming in. That changes everything as well. And so it was more of a case where is the company, or at least I try to tell the candidates, do we have an idea what we're trying to do? Or are we just sitting here twiddling our thumbs thinking we're going to make it just magically somehow? And so just having that different confidence levels. And I like to do quarters more than anything else.
On your answer, right, a second ago, like the questions you would ask the CEO, I don't know if asking those questions would make that much of a difference, right? Previously, because they're questions that, unfortunately, if the person is not being honest about other things, those questions are going to actually alert the person, and then they're going to say what they think you want to hear. Like Dan and I spoke about this before, and I think a really good way of questioning is to ask them and see where their default position is. So like, don't give them that kind of alarm bell where you go, is there enough money, or am I, can you afford to pay me or something? Because they're just going to say, yes, we've got loads, right? It's like asking them a question and just seeing where their default position goes on certain things, I think is probably the best case scenario. But unfortunately, if they're really good at sales, it's hard to have to chalk it up to experience. And I think either go one or two ways, like go cynical or take it as an experience and say, I'm not going to be cynical, but I'm going to kind of let it inform my next place, and I'm going to do the exact opposite. So I was in a situation where it wasn't that clear or transparent. I'm going to double down and go even more transparent. And I think that's what you'll end up doing. I think that's what you would be like as a founder, is you'd be like an open door. Like everything is open and you can discuss. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. We my co-founders, we talked about if we secure funding and start to get employees. I said, like, you do your team meetings, like, and I was like, I would love to have transparency about our runway and burn down and things like that with a small company. And that's my reaction, as you quite rightly right, Chris. It's my reaction towards what I've just gone through. Not that the co-founders were against it; they were on board as well. So it's very much that. Whereas if I hadn't gone through this experience, I don't necessarily think I would have reacted the same way or said the same thing and been like, "It's good to be transparent." Don't get me wrong, but I don't necessarily think I would treat it as high importance as I have now because of what I've gone through. So I think it's spot on there. Where even if I go to a different company, might be the same situation as well, where I'd be, really digging deeper than I would normally want to dig into things on the financial side. And I'm specifically focused on the financial side because that's what I've just gone through as a result of it. So yeah, I think that's exactly it.
It's a really interesting tension, I think, in startup world, because from my experiences, you're in this space as either as a founder or an early stage, like as an executive role or anything like that. Or maybe it's even broader than that too. When you're in the space, you're very much like, I know people like jokingly say it's like drinking Kool-Aid and stuff, right? But it is a little bit like that, because when a startup has this element of idealism, or like, we have this vision, it's not reality yet. We're buying into it, and part of it is a buy into it, I think. And I would say too, like, even in my current role, like, my engineers are similar. They are actually very passionate about the vision and what we want to achieve. And when you talk to, say, like, if I'm in meetings with investors and that kind of thing, like, we're absolutely pitching, like, in the process of that, you're selling the vision, right? Like, you're selling what it's about, and interviews are the same. Like, you're hiring people, onboarding them, you're selling that vision to them. But then you have the reality of, where things are at in terms of, like you're saying, with runway, with you're trying to achieve this big vision, but you have kind of reality as well. How I guess do you approach that challenge? Because I suppose, like, we'd be talking about maybe like, oh yes, in the interviews when you're grilling a CEO. I mean, I think that would be actually quite difficult to break through the vision aspect of what a CEO has to do within a startup, because it's a very critical role, I guess, to be able to be in that role, have the vision in play, and to help everyone in the team rally around it. I would imagine it would probably be very hard to find chinks in the armor of that when you're in an interview situation and you're trying to work it out, like, how realistic are we talking about here? I suppose looking at what you project to the rest of your team, there is that tension. And I guess from what I've seen, I would absolutely say, yeah, a lot of the team members are absolutely passionate about that same vision and came on board to achieve that vision and want to do that. How do you balance, I guess, that transparency and reality and the vision and help people kind of understand where things are at, but help keep them, I guess, focused on the vision? How do you, I guess a startup is if you haven't worked in one, I think maybe it's a strange world in some respects. So I don't know, maybe talk to us a bit about how you approach that kind of tension with people, with the people you hire, the team, the people you lead. How do you help them have that right balance as well in their day to day?
Yeah, it's I think you hit the nail on the head. Startups are a bit of a weird beast, to be honest. And I think it starts off with the kinds of people you hire into the roles that you're trying to fill. I'm always skeptical of people who haven't given it a go yet in the startup world, haven't actually worked in one before, come from a big enterprise or a big corporate. It is a massive culture shock. You in the enterprise world, things are all set up. You stay in your lane. It's kind of clock in, clock out. That's really it. It's fine for some people. Startups, it's completely the opposite. You've got the ability to influence way beyond your lane, so to speak, if you want to do that, or you don't have to if you don't want to either. But there is that flex. There aren't many processes, if any, in the initial days, and there's all these kinds of uncomfortable scenarios if you're not comfortable with those kinds of situations where change is constant, as you said before. So I think for me, I always start on the people I'm filling into the roles, and are they ready? If it's their first time going to a startup, are they really ready for it? Because it all sounds glamorous. We've all heard the stories about early employees, YouTube, Facebook, and I think everyone has that pegged in the back of their mind. That's what they're going to go when they go to a startup, and it's 9 times out of 10 never like that. So it's always a tough slog, especially in the beginning when things aren't there. And so I definitely start with that. And then if there are people or candidates who have come from startups, trying to understand what they were doing at that startup and what we're doing here, any similarities, what influence and things they had. And then, so it starts for me with who you bring in. And once you've got that up and running, I like to operate with, we said before, the transparency sort of way of operating and doing things. And so quite often I've said, I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. And I've been very transparent to the team about it, but we're going to figure these things out. These are our problems. And these are the things we definitely know. In terms of the vision, which is everyone's bought into, our roadmap, our customer numbers, or what metrics we're trying to hit for, these are the goals we've got. This is what we're going to do. This is our assumptions that we can actually increase these metrics by doing these things. Let's go on and do that. Part of it, I realized that now I'm answering this question as well, is I play a bit of a sales role as well when it comes to recruitment, but also when people are in the companies, you're always selling to a degree. And so that plays a bit of a role as well in terms of how I get people to balance between the two.
How do you, if someone was wanting to make, let's say they haven't been in a startup before, how would you describe, I guess you've given a bit of a description for some of those differences, Ram. If you had someone who was, let's say they're a software engineer, or they're in some kind of role, they're not in a startup, but they're contemplating it. Is there anything that you could tell them to kind of something to think about, or how to assess, how would someone assess? I guess you can assess as the hiring manager, right? But if you're just a software engineer, what advice would you give them, I guess, to kind of explore whether it's something they wanted to do?
Yeah, so I think it would come down to the way that they would like to, what kind of job they're looking for and ways of working, I think, is a first step. And are they comfortable with things like, unfortunately, constant changing priorities is one part of it. Are you, like the questions I'll ask myself is, am I comfortable coming into a job where work's given to me, it's pretty clear what we're doing, I clock in and clock out, do these kinds of things and move on? Or am I the kind of person who wants to come in and make a difference? I want to solve that customer problem. I'm happy to engage with teams around solving different problems. Priority changing is not a big deal for me. I'm comfortable with these kinds of unknowns that happen within the startup world, whereas in a bigger corporate, it's a little bit more stable. And the stability aspect as well. Like it's a risk going into a startup, as I've recently experienced. It's a risk as it all. But as a software engineer, what are your motives? What are you passionate about? Are you passionate about just the code side of it? Are you passionate about problem solving and customers? Are you passionate about working with people and teams and those kinds of things? it kind of questions you would ask yourself and go, well, if you're ticking yes to all those kinds of boxes, a startup is probably a good place. Enterprise and corporates do have some of that, but if you want a bigger sphere of influence, if you want to grow as well in your career, you want to try different things, you've got more opportunity, I would say, at a startup to be able to lean into different areas versus in a corporate space. But I think ultimately it'll come down to, if you're making a decision like that, what are you most comfortable with? Do you want to give something like this a go? Because it is an interesting beast to go to.
I'm glad your last half of the answer had the positives in there, because it sounded pretty scary at the start.
I was going to start by saying, like, the first question you should ask yourself is, are you sure you want to do this? No, I think, as much as my answer may have stemmed towards that, there is so much upside when it comes to it. Like, I know I don't think I could even go to a corporate ever now. I think I'm done and dusted with that. Like, I started my career in government back in New Zealand, which is an experience on its own, working for government. And then I moved into a medium-sized business. Then went to Xero. Then I've done startups more so now, which are traditional startups. I don't think I can even go back. And the reason for that is, like, I think of the corporate world or the enterprise world, and I've given it a go. I like to do more than what my job necessarily tells me to do, but there's more, red tape around things. Whereas a startup, you can grow so much individually, but you can also grow the company. You can influence. I keep using that word influence because your sphere is huge at a startup. It's as much as you want it to be. Now, that's not to say that when you go to a startup, you've got to be jack of all trades and do everything at the company, and you're going to be the CEO in 2 weeks' time and doing sales and everything. But it's a case where you have more opportunities to do these kinds of things. And so if you've got that hunger to grow, and, as a software engineer in the example, if you want to, grow in your technical expertise at startup, you're going to get a lot more opportunities to grow that. But if you want to move into, say, management positions or non-technical parts of the business as well, there's, again, more opportunities that come up because startups need more people than they've actually got. And so there's more work to be done.
Tell us about the transition, I guess, is the question. I'm assuming, I suppose, there's a transition from your role as a CTO into a co-founder. Would that be correct? Is there some kind of transition that your mindset is shifting into something slightly different?
Yes, there is. So I play a dual role as a co-founder at the moment. So I'm the only technical person on the team. So I am doing all the building inside. But definitely, it's been nice to compare and contrast being the co-founder of this company, MedTribe, versus when I was also CTO for Couture at the time. And the focus areas are a bit different. So as a co-founder, you spend a lot more time on the sales side, the business side of it. Tech is important, but it's not the sole, like, it's 80% of my time, 20% of it, arguably, I spend on the sales and business side of it as well. And forecasting and all those kinds of things you need to do. And so it's been a transition for sure, because if I hadn't gone through the experiences I've been through, I think I still would have made the same kind of transition. But I've certainly put a lot more emphasis on some aspects that I wouldn't have done so accordingly beforehand. That's why I think that's why people become founders. If they're a CTO, want to be a co-founder or founder, you want to do those other kinds of things. I actually do enjoy thinking about the business side of it as well as it. So it's been quite a nice little change. And I think this experience, should it succeed or not succeed, I would be using those skills and things towards the next role that I go to as well.
Are you taking on, I guess I'm interested to know, do you see it as taking on more risk as a like moving from just CTO to be CTO and co-founder? Do you think there's more risk in that, or do you see it a different way?
Risk in terms of taking on more responsibility, or risk in?
I guess maybe in terms of, I suppose I'm wondering about my assumption, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the previous roles were kind of like, I'm in a slightly bigger organization. I guess I'm assuming maybe there's product market fit and you're in scale up, like you're helping to scale this from startup position or early startup into something a little bit bigger. Going in at ground zero, do you see that as a different risk profile in terms of, like, potential failure, or are there other things that you look at in terms of what those differences are? Are there different kind of pros and cons versus, if you're in that earlier stage?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So for our company, it's we believe we're getting product market fit. We're not quite there yet, so it's very, very early days. So I think there's all risk at the moment with where we are, because we all are full time on this, and we are not a revenue generating business at this point in time. So there's there's all risk at the moment. So we're working on something that we don't know if it's going to actually work or not. We've got a strong assumption that it will. So yeah, definitely all risk in that regard. But assuming we've got the product market fit and got some revenue coming in and things like that, I think at that point, those are the companies that I've previously worked at were at that level. And so I find that the risk of that is a little bit, it's dampened down significantly because it's a bit more of an actual business, so to speak, versus where I am right now. Yeah, for MedTribe at the moment, it is so early for us that it's hard for me to really assess right now, other than trying to give it a go by all of us doing it full time rather than on the side like we were beforehand. So I think it's definitely all risk right now, and it's hard to say if there's going to be any upside until we have any upside.
Where does your comfort level for risk come from? Like, how are you the type of person to just go, yeah, we're just gonna do this?
Yeah. It's interesting because it might come across that I'm quite as much as I like change and startups and things, I like stability as well. And so this is my first, actually it's my third time doing it, but this is what I'll consider my first time doing a proper co-founding. I've done a couple of ventures beforehand, but they were, looking back, they're probably just projects more than actual founding ideas. So this one's interesting. I think it's a case where I think I judged up and made an assessment where I feel like I've achieved a lot as an employee of different companies. And my growth mindset was I wanted to be manager of technical people. As much as I love the coding side of it, I really like teaching, coaching, and leading. And I feel like I've done that at a few different companies, and I'll love to continue doing that. But this opportunity came up, and I was like, this is another skill set, another thing that I can learn to grow. And even if it fails over for whatever reason, touch wood, it doesn't. This is learnings I can take to wherever I go next. And so I guess to answer that question, Dan, like it's a huge risk. I've got a young daughter. My wife is working, so thankfully that's helping us a lot. Taken on that risk because I believe in the vision that I've also helped create, so I've become that salesman a part of it. But also it's trying something different because I can go for another job somewhere else and I can rinse and repeat that. But I think deep down my motivation is coming from trying something new here and learning. And I feel like I've learned already so much. We were fortunate enough to get into Techstars London program last year. So we did that program, and that was an eye-opener for me as well, to learn a lot about that in terms of how businesses and things get going and things. So, that's been fantastic. And I think I jumped full-time into this, into MedTribe just before we got into that program, but because I saw that there was an opportunity to actually do something here rather than just be another project on the side. So my risk assessment on it all came down to, well, this actually could be something, so let's give it a go. And I don't want to have any regrets, in 2-3 years time when I decided to walk away and it actually became something as well. So selfishly, it's a little bit like I've built this thing from the ground up for myself. I don't want to walk away too soon and give it a real go. And you're taking on some risk, financially for sure as well. And cliche saying you only live once, and if you've got an opportunity, I feel like it's worth taking more than anything else.
I think there's also a fundamental difference in the risk because you have a lot more control over the outcome. And you have the founding idea with your co-founders, but the difference is nothing's happening on the side that you don't know about or can't control. Because you could be the best CTO in the world and have a little microculture within your engineering and product team, and it's doing amazing. And then all of a sudden, the business isn't paying their employees, right? Or there's something going on that you can't control. So there's more risk, and then there's also less risk in some ways because you're more in control of it, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah. I don't really see myself as someone who needs the control, but I think it's a good assessment. I think I think also part of what excites me by it, purely on the technical front, to speak about that point, is the last few companies I've worked at, I've always come in and, as you do, Dan, you inherit a lot of legacy decisions and legacy things. And look, no product out there is going to have 100% beautiful code. Like, it's just not the world we live in. But I've certainly seen some things in companies that I've walked into where I don't really understand why technical decisions were made at that early stage, which, it pains me to say, but you shouldn't have made those decisions. And it's fine in hindsight to say these things, but like even some bare bones basics. And it's like, this is worrying because you're trying to scale this business and you're trying to scale this product to more customers, but you've got these massive blocks because some decisions were made early. And I think part of the excitement for MedTribe here is that or I can take those learnings and go, well, not build the most beautiful products in the world because the code is not. But there are certain things where you don't drop the quality, I believe, at the early stages because it's going to help you get to that scaling stage next coming up. Whereas the companies I worked at, the first things we do is we have to repay all that debt because, we've got this wonderful vision and features and this roadmaps all across. You can't do half of them because we have to buffer in all this time to fix everything before we can even start on these. So part of the appeal for me is being able to try as best to prevent that from happening at this company because I have such control, to use that word as well, in the early stages where good decisions are being made and, we're thinking about future, but not thinking too far in the future and balancing the two and, doing enough just for now versus making sure we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot in about 4 months' time as well. So that part of it on the technical side has been really cool. But yeah, Chris, you're right. Like on the other side of it, like the three of us were, the way we actually met. So there's two brothers, as I mentioned before, but I actually used to work with one of the brothers here in Australia. We became friends. So his former wife used to work with me. And so we all kind of had this friendship going on. Then I hired him at Delegate Connect as my first hire, and we still maintained friendship. And then we've gone off and done this. And his brother is now is the CEO.
Cool.
So we've got a good relationship built with us. And it's been really great because as the only technical and product person at the company, I'm actually getting to coach those guys on that side of it as well, which is quite fulfilling as well for me. On the flip side of it, all the sales and the business side, the financialing, modeling, all those kinds of things has also been nice as well because I've been heavily involved in it too.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, legacy systems and that kind of thing, and your role as a CTO and startup, it's I find it kind of fascinating, and people have I've changed my view on it over time, and others haven't, and there seems to be differing opinions on some things. I suppose, like, how do you one thing that fascinates me is balancing. So how do you balance those decisions that you have to make early with, and because time. So I gave a presentation last night, and my starting point was that in a startup, the only thing that can mean death for your startup is that you run out of money and you don't have product market fit. So that's kind of like that's your brick wall. Everything else is kind of nice to have in there, in quotes, is kind of how I phrased it, right? So even like quality, low technical debt, a really great architecture, really great security, everything that you would look at as an engineering leader and go, oh, well, this is important. Like you probably, I mean, depending on where people come from, they may have worked in bigger organizations like what you're describing, where you carry some legacy stuff and you're kind of looking at it going, why?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we fix it? But I think with the realities of the startup where, well, it's actually like usually not a critical part of your survival at those early stages. How do you view that tension, and how do you kind of navigate it?
Yeah, I mean, you're in the business of buying time, essentially, when it comes to a startup. And so it's very easy for any engineer of any kind of experience level to come into a startup and go, that's bad, that shouldn't be like that. And it's like the past decisions come from it. So my earlier comments are more from the fact that these aren't even like you cut corners. These are like, you didn't even do the proper thing. Like, and I'm saying proper is probably not the right word either. It's like, there are some things that are just non-negotiable that you need to do just to even have a product that actually do something. So that's that kind of category. Whereas previous companies I worked in where, you did the right thing, quote unquote, but they cut some corners, and it's fine because you need to do that. Like I could spend 6 months building something which is beautiful and all the ticks every single box in the world about how to do engineering, or I could build the same thing in arguably 6 days. I'm not saying that's basically 6 days, right? What's more important to a startup? Probably the 6 days, because you can spend the rest of that 6 months building other things and rinse and repeating, and you're going for product market fit, going for revenue, going for users, etc. So you're in that business of buying time. So when it comes to making those decisions at companies, those are the questions I usually ask myself is, do we have the flexibility and the capacity to go for the bigger, beautiful, the right things? Is it mission critical to get it right? So if we're talking like a payments kind of situation where you probably should get it right first time, you can't really be stopping there, versus say, I don't know, a page. It's okay. Like, let's do it quick and dirty, because I would always skew towards quick and dirty, because the more quick and dirties you have out there, the more chance you got a product market fit you're going to get to. And then you come back and fix it later. So anything that's mission critical, we should really think about it and make sure we do the proper way because it's mission critical. If it falls over and the business falls over, well, we probably should have done it then. Everything else falls in the other bucket, which is how quickly can we do it without potentially having to redo it next week, and kind of getting that balance between the two. Now, when you have when you hire an engineer to a company that's got that legacy stuff and you're trying to balance, well, we're going to build this thing quick and dirty and we got this old thing, cool, we have to, the feedback I usually get is we have to refactor everything and then we can start it. Do we need to refactor it is the first question. Like, is it necessary to do that, or is it because it feels like the right thing to do? And if it's an emotional response, it's sad for me to say as an engineer, but it kind of, you have to park it and go, well, what's the value we're trying to get? What's the outcome we're trying to achieve by this feature? This feature is going to generate X revenue. That's what matters. Or this feature is going to make the next 10 go faster. Cool, well, let's do that as well. So there's always this question you're going to be asking yourself, because ultimately everyone wants everything done yesterday. And how do we shorten that time that something takes so we can get the outcome? And if the outcome is I want to just make the legacy code disappear because I want to, like, that doesn't really fly. You do put in some buffer for tackling technical debt, those kinds of things. But in the startup world, as you said there, like, if you haven't got product market fit or you haven't got revenue coming in, you're doing everything you can to get one, if not both of them, in the door.
So when I find an interesting challenge, right? I'm the CTO, but I'm not always around for the team, let's say for a team of engineers, right? And I would say probably I have some advantages at the CTO level because I have higher view of the business and its priorities. And so some of the things you talked about where you have that view of balancing, where's the value in this? How mission critical is it because you need those kind of inputs to be able to navigate through that decision as you were describing, right? In your role, how do you give engineers the right ingredients so that they can have a similar kind of framework? Because I find it kind of like there's probably, I don't know, 100 decisions every day that an engineer is going to make. And I'm not going to be there for 100% of the time. There's no way. So in those 100 decisions, and some of them are small, some are a little bit bigger, how do you give them a framework that they can make those same kind of choices?
Yeah, definitely don't want every individual engineer, if not every team, coming to the CTO to make a final sign-off or decision. That's not a scalable model, not a good culture either. So definitely focusing on empowering teams to make good decisions, and it starts with giving them the information that I have at the time. So whether I have it or the business has it, part of that is every feature there's an outcome, for example, or there's some metric that we're trying to achieve. Some companies I've worked at, we did OKRs and that all kind of laddered up to that. So having people, not engineers, for example, not just going, well, I'm picking up a ticket and it just says build this feature. Having the full story about why you're doing it, what's the problem, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and actually building in that culture of questioning the work. When I talk to engineers about things, I always say, like, and the businesses and CEOs as well, the last thing we want to do is write code. And the reason I say that is because it's probably one of the most expensive part of the entire process when it comes to it. So we want to do everything we can before it to really validate that this is something that we should invest an engineer's time into, a team's time into, designing, building it, etc. But having that culture of questioning, why are we doing something? And having teams be able to make good decisions. And if they can't come to some decision or an answer, they can go seek that information. It doesn't have to be from me, or it can be from the CEO or whoever it needs to give that information, just to make sure that the teams are doing things that actually matter as well. And part of that process as well is, as engineers, as a cohort, is I like to, every so often we do like a town hall style approach where it's talking about that high level view, where things that aren't on the day-to-day, look, this is what we're aiming for as a business. This is what we're doing in engineering, why we're going to do these technical kinds of things, and giving as much context, because you're spot on, Dan. Like, I think I'm successful in my roles if I'm not needed. And if I'm not needed, it means I've done the right thing. And so in the most recent company I worked at, thankfully, we got to a point where the teams were making really, really good decisions, to a point where they're every time asking the CEO would come and do CEO bombs, and then questioning the CEO, like, that's cool, but why? And it's because we're trying to protect that time. We want to make sure that the teams are working on the things that really move the needle, the things that really matter. But teams can't make those decisions if they don't know what the needle is, or any sort of surrounding context that has it. Now, there are some aspects that teams can't or don't have all information, but I think there's a lot of it that they can get. And a part of that I do is just being as transparent as possible on that front. And it's fine for things, for teams to question these things. And building that culture, I think, is important. I've worked at companies where it's the opposite, where you just get told what to do and you just do it. And I think it's dangerous because I know as an engineer, I've been in that position where you're like, this feels a bit weird, but you can't question it because you just don't know what to question it. So you go, you just assume someone knows what they're talking about and you do it, and then you don't know what happens as a result. So something that I definitely pride myself on is making sure we build a culture where that is something that's relevant, regardless of what your job title is and seniority and experiences. It's just questioning these things because you're trying to protect your time more than anything else.
What I find it interesting that, product and you say product in air quotes and engineering in air quotes, they've got like these two different camps, right? And both camps need to work together well and collaborate together well. But there's certainly, I guess, ingredients that are probably important to it, at least make the working relationship work better. Some of the things that you mentioned about, the why behind things and things like that are important. What do you do, or what process do you go through, or how do you approach where those kind of situations need improvement? Now, you would, I would assume, say, okay, I'm in the engineering camp and we're collaborating together with the product camp. So I'll give you a bit of an example. Like, I guess there's a common, I don't know if it's a stereotype yet, maybe like it will be in the future, but talented product people tend to jump quite quickly, I find, from like, we identify a problem to solve, and then we're jumping to solution. And it's quite natural, I think, to jump to solution quite quickly, right? But when that comes to the engineering side, sometimes it's difficult to debug, because to give it like a technical term, the process that went through. So I got someone like destroying concrete outside my window there. They're trying to debug. It's been interesting because I've had some conversations with people recently where they've expressed that product people may communicate in a certain way that would state that, this is what it has to be, right? Like, this is the answer to all of our problems. And engineering, I don't think it's natural for engineers to challenge that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like, it's just much harder to challenge it if it's phrased in a certain way. Or if it's gone to solution, how does someone even know when to unpack and debug and get back to the problem and get aligned on that? How do you, I guess, navigate those kind of challenges?
Yeah, common trait, I think that's happening. I've seen as well in companies I worked at. A pet peeve of mine, because I've got so many thoughts in my head and so many views on this. I'm a big fan of the three-legged stool, three amigos, that mindset of a product, an engineer, or product person, technical person, and a UX designer person. They come up with the solution, not a product person. Product person is an advocate for the user who really wants to go and understand the problem. The designer also has a second stage of that as well. But it's very common where companies as well, and the most recent one has started off the same way. It's product person goes talk, cool, I'll do it. We can do it this way. Goes to designer, it needs to do these 10 things. Designer designs as per spec, and then spec again is given to engineer and it tries to be built. 9 times out of 10, that's wrong because the customer doesn't really know what they want most of the time, but also it isn't a good way of working either. And it's just, I call it, it's this waterfall model, because you just spec, and then just execute at the other end, and no one's talking to each other, and it just feels wrong. So part of the things I've done, I think every company I've worked at as a leader now, is explaining that it's not a product person's responsibility to solve the problem. I believe their responsibility is to really understand the problem space and advocate for the user or customer internally. Yeah. Find out all the information that needs to. So then the design camp and the engineering camp can ask questions about different scenarios that come up, because the engineering camp understand the technical constraints of the product. The design can understand the user experience constraints, and the product understand the user's needs and etc. I find it very hard to believe that a product person can understand the engineering camp's requirements and the UX requirements and have it solved. Usually within the call, they're talking to the customer. I've seen it happen. Like, we'll put a button there that does exactly that. Like, I don't understand that world. So some more practical things I want to do is just explain it. Look, it's a three-legged stool, three amigos, whatever term it's been used in the product world now is three healthy, 3 points, in the team and the ways of working, but it's healthy tension. So the designer is advocating for user experience and UI things. The technical camp is advocating for the technical stuff that needs to be done and what limitations there are in the product. And the product is advocating for the user's needs. And fortunately, you're all compromising with each other, but that's going to yield the best solutions. And as I was saying before, we want to write code last. I was leaning towards this. We want to have, we don't want meetings for the sake of it, but you want to have discussions where a product person doesn't tell a designer, go off and build the spec. Instead, you have these voices go, here's the problem. Let's truly understand the problem collectively, align on the expectations, and then let's come up with 1 to 2 or whatever potential solutions, or the one solution. Let's go and design that. Let's now think about the technical side of it, if we haven't already the technical side of it. And you're doing all this stuff and making sure the customer's needs are sorted. And then it goes into the proper, whatever design camp process needs to be done in engineering camp. But the chances of success coming out of that process is much higher than a product person going, I know exactly what to do. I also question about when one person, regardless if it's product person or designer or engineer, comes up and says, we should do it this way. More heads in the room generally build a better solution. There's different viewpoints, there's different people coming from different angles, and you get a better result. There is that balance, though, between having too much discussion versus doing some actual work as well. But to really answer the question here, it's about building that culture about an engineer doesn't stay in their lane and just write code. Designer doesn't just talk to a few customers and design stuff, and a product manager doesn't just hand work over the fence. It's this breaking down these silos and going, product, or I like to call it delivery, is one organism, and you've got specialities of engineers, design, and product, but you're all working together and trying even in a team scenario, working all together and making sure that you have the context. And so my earlier comments around making sure teams have context to make good decisions feeds into all this, because the product, the engineering, and the design camps, they all have as much context as they need from the business to make those decisions. I really dislike the take orders from the role that's on my left and then just execute according to it, because I mean, we've had years of waterfall and things like that. And I'm sure it works, but there's lots of problems with it too.
There's also like a big correlation with founders that do exactly the same thing, right? If a founder is on a Figma file commenting on every single thing, then
I'll tell you the number of times I've seen CEOs in Figma when I'm looking at something for a reason, and they're like, I don't mean just looking at like perusing. They're actually like, this thing here, and they're like, what are you doing? Like something is clearly wrong here. But you also don't need to be at that level of detail. There's other ways we can solve this, but that's another pet peeve of mine. Not to throw him under the bus or anything, but one of my co-founders is a little bit in that space around the product side, where so he'll talk to a customer and then immediately, he's got a fantastic brain, but he'll immediately go to a solution and Slack me and go, we should do this, and I go, yeah, like that's one of the 10 solutions I can tell you right now that I can top of my head and go, let's just take a step back, like just get the problem, understand the customer's got this. And I know they might be frustrated, or, it's difficult when you're in a call, you don't want to look silly, or it's that ability to know that. So yeah, I've definitely been coaching him and be like, that's cool. Just write it all up. We'll discuss it on our next, we do grooming sessions and go, because I keep saying 9 times out of 10, we've had a few scenarios like that in our company, and we've actually come up with much better solutions that solve more customer problems and building one thing. They're just going on this one customer's one need at this one time. And what I really dislike about that way of operating as well is you end up building a bit of a Frankenstein product, because you've got these weird things that are everywhere rather than a continuity of like a holistic view of what your product actually needs to do. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but that's something that he does at the moment, and he's getting better, which is great.
It also comes from you too, though, right? If you have an idea or a hunch or an assumption, if you treat it as this is 1 of 10, let's do some discussion around it, test the assumptions, etc. You kind of lead from the front. But a lot of people will say what you're saying, but then this is the idea and this is what we're going to do. So I think there's a lot of like theory and this is how we should do it. And then in practice, it's like, this is my idea, let's go with it.
I think the real art of it is the balancing, because you can't validate everything either. Like, the famous Henry Ford quote, if you go ask people what they wanted a faster horse. Like it's not the scenario. Like, I've got an assumption that, users want to do X on this product. So I can just go ahead and build it. But I can also go ahead and ask X users, but what is X? And all you're trying to do is like how much validation do you want to do, and it's and clarifying and validating your assumptions. So there is that balance to be had around like it's a gut feel. 10 users said I'll pay for this. Will they actually pay for it? Like you don't know. Like there's this balancing act you got to go through. So it is tough. Like I don't think I personally haven't managed to find a good kind of framework or process to follow about whether I just follow my gut assumption and do it, or we go talk to too many people, because there is that's part of it as well. But it's interesting because assumptions can can skew you one way and take you down the wrong path too.
What's your approach on this, Dan?
I find this quite an interesting space, and I really like. So my preference is I'm starting to form the opinion that like what you just said to just before, Kunal. Like when you put something in front of someone and you say, "Will you pay for this?" Pretty low value. Like people will say things like that because they don't want to upset you, or they want to be nice. And it's not a, they just don't realize, I guess, like the impact of that. I suppose on the receiving end though, I think I'm realizing it's pretty low value, right? And I'm also kind of the opinion, or forming an opinion, that when you put something in front of someone, it immediately biases them to your solution. And so my opinion on it is that I don't want to put anything in front of a potential customer or a customer too early where it skews or biases the conversation in a certain direction. And so I'm starting to come to the opinion of when I did my second startup, I had a customer, and I would this was the days before the cloud, basically. Right? So cloud didn't exist. The software that I built them was deployed on premise in a server in their office. So about every quarter or so, roughly, I would kind of go down to their office with a new release and install it on their server. And it was actually like very high value to see the teams at work in their office, because for context, I was building a CRM product, right? And the CRM product was quite broad in terms of CRM. It had a lot of business process stuff in there and a bunch of things. And some of the features were like, because it wasn't just for that one customer, it was like a broad market kind of product. But some of the features that I had ideas about putting in, or how to design it, or how to implement it, was based on what I saw in their office. And part of the advantage of that is I could just observe. Like I could just sit in the office, and I might be even talking to someone, or I might just ask a question. Oh, what's going on over there? Or what are they doing? And sometimes they would offer information as well. I'd walk through the office and they'd give me an update. Oh, we just signed this big client, and we're talking about it. Or we're up to X amount of money in payroll a month or something like that. Like, oh yeah, we're kicking goals, and great. And I would just watch them work. And one time I was in the office, and I think I asked the question, or they mentioned it. Oh, we have this bookshelf in the office, and it was quite a large bookshelf, probably about, I don't know, about that size roughly behind me. And it had all these folders on it, and each folder was a representation of like the work that they were working on. And they would go, if you were working on the project, you would go and pick up the folder and go through it, and it had all the information in there, right? Like all the customers, all the payment amounts, all the kind of the planning, the structuring, all that stuff. And I kind of observed that a few times. I guess I'd been in the office a few times, and I was working on different features over time with the CRM. But from observing them in the office, I decided, what would be cool to have this kind of feature that it was kind of like a sales management. And I thought, I'm going to put it into the product, and they never asked me for it though, right? So they never requested it. It was just from me watching them work. When I said to them, so I didn't even tell them I was working on it. I was like, I brought out the feature, delivered it to them, and said, oh, by the way, there's this new feature called sales management or something. And their first reaction was, oh, we're not going to use that. And it's like, okay, that's fine, no worries. So just like, I said, give it a go. If you want to give it a go, it's there. Like it's in your system, right? There's a little button called sales, and you can click on that and check it out. Anyway, about like 2 months later, I think roughly, I got a message from them, and they said, we're using this feature, man. It's awesome. Like we've gotten rid of the folders. And I was like, yeah. So it's quite fascinating that I was reflecting. I've been reflecting on this a lot at homes, because in the current company I'm in, because it's a lot harder, I think, on the internet as well to kind of see people at at work or at, when they're doing the process they're doing. And in customer interviews, I will ask them, so I'll ask them just theoretically, oh, so how do you do this and how do you do that? And they'll kind of explain it to me. And I won't put any designs in front of them because I'm just there to discovery. I just want to know what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're solving the problem today, what kind of challenges they have. Just describe it to me. Like what happens when you go and, search for a property online or whatever, right? And then I'll say to them at the end, and maybe I shouldn't do it at the end, I don't know, because not everyone is comfortable with this, which is kind of fascinating. But I go, can you search in a property portal, just share your screen and just do what you do, right? Just pretend I'm not here and just like talk about what you're doing or something. That's fine. Like kind of like a usability test, but it's on someone else's platform, right? Just do what you do today. And, and sometimes though, some people have given me like, oh, yeah, I've got this spreadsheet and I do this, do that. And they've like shown me the spreadsheet. It's like, okay, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Really, really high value. Then sometimes I'll go through the property search and they'll make commentary and I'll just ask questions, like, oh, why did you do that there? And, what are you looking for when you're looking at this? And I find those conversations way higher value for me in understanding like what they're doing, what pains they have, what, how they see the world, how they do what they do, how they solve the problem today. And that's kind of like that folder analogy, right? I'm just watching them and I'm watching them walk up to the folder and pull it out and go through the pages. And I'm thinking, yeah, I could build something to fix this, to make it much better. But I don't know that it's a common, or it seems to be, I don't know, maybe we've, as an industry, or a product function or a design function, maybe we've kind of slotted in a bit too hard into designs and prototypes and stuff like that. But I think that discovery phase where you're just observing is so much more valuable. But I don't know that we practice it as well as the other side where we have wireframes and stuff,
Yeah, preaching to the choir, Dan. I in my most recent company, I introduced product discovery to the concept, to the delivery function, which is because the company as a whole would have a roadmap, which was basically the CEO's wish list. And that's all unvalidated. It's great to have a vision, but it's all unvalidated. You'd be surprised the number of times you go into a discovery session and then they're like, we don't need any of this stuff. Like, what was the point of it? But yeah, just observing your users and what they're doing and just watching them do some basic day-to-day. Because funny enough, the most value that I've seen being built from a discovery session and a solution is not massive features that come out of it, but it's like small little, what we would consider low-hanging fruit, but to people saving them hours a day. And they're not doing like a massive new feature that does it. It's like a simple thing is like a download button. Right now, there was a company I worked at a while ago where they had a call center and they actually made every new person who joined the company go spend a day in the call center, regardless of your role, just to observe to see how the product's being used. And I found that most valuable because at the company, we did this concept of hack days where you would just like work on non-roadmap stuff and learn. And sometimes you would do some random stuff here and there. One of them was this person was working in accounts or something for the company. Every Monday, he would spend 4 hours copying and pasting rows from his browser to a spreadsheet. 4 hours a week. He didn't voice it. He didn't say anything. He's just doing his job because that's what he does. Yeah. Someone said, well, what if you had a button that just like exported a spreadsheet? They go, that'll be amazing. I'll save 4 hours a week. And it took, I was the one who built that. It took me about, maybe an hour and a half of dev time, roughly, the whole process. That saved their company and this one guy 4 hours a week. But no one's ever going to raise that. Whereas a visionary founder will go and go, that doesn't matter. Let's build them a mobile app. Let's build them something random. And like, they're going to love it. And I think that bias towards what I want to build versus, or what I think they're going to need versus their true problems is amazing. The same as your folder analogy. No one's going to say, oh, we should have digitized folders. They just did it because that's how people adapt to software. We had a similar scenario at MedTry where we did the same thing you said there. We just watch people. We go into discovery calls and just watch them. So we're an event platform. Watch them set up events, and they talk through. And then quite often, initially it was tough, but now the people that we repeat this with, they're quite vocal. They're like, it'd be nice if this was happening. And we don't just magically go up and build it. We note that down and realize, there's a trend here. People are copying and pasting these things and repeating these actions. Maybe we should build something that helps them prevent them from repeating it. And we've rolled that out recently. And again, no one's asked for it. They're just kind of saying like, it'll be nice. But that one particular feature alone has saved these people hours as well, because they're not manually copying and pasting. Versus if I was to show a Figma prototype and be like, what do you think of this? Oh yeah, that's cool. And I also find when you show Figma prototypes, people don't really look at the thing you show, they look at the colors, or they look at it looks nice. Oh, but it'd be nice if it was this and that. It's like, well, that's not what I'm trying to show you here.
They also don't know what the problem is, right? So they don't know, like, they know the pain and they know like the process, but they don't know what the actual fundamental problem is. Like one of my mates, who's a PM now, shout out to Tom Mitchell, gave me a really good recommendation, and he does this with some of his customers as well. But Dan, you're talking about going on and doing like a shared screen situation. That's really good, but still you might not get 100% natural behavior because they might be nervous or they might not really know what to do. A good way of doing it is if you jump on a call with them, show them how to record their screen. So like Command Shift 5 on a Mac, and then just ask them randomly one time, just press Command Shift 5, hit the minimize, and then just go through the process you would go through at some point, and then save that. Like, they need to know how to do it and send you it, and then you actually have that as a recording. And it's more kind of natural behavior, and you can send it to other people in the business and stuff. He found that extremely helpful with some of the non-technical people that'd be like, oh, I'll do this or I'll do that. Or I think it was in a like shipping container or something, and he was trying to build a product for them. And he was just like, he showed a couple of the project managers how to do it. And then he actually had these recordings that he could be like, oh, that's completely different to what you actually showed me you would do.
Yeah.
And the reason it reminded me is because I accidentally hit screen record yesterday and forgot about it, and had an 11-hour recording this morning when I woke up. My MacBook was like full. I was like, what the hell? What's going on? Press the wee stop button, man. Don't forget that. How do you want to wrap it up, Dan? Final question. Well, actually, tell us a little bit about MedTribe and why you're excited about it and what's happening over the next few months and how people can find out about it.
Yeah, sure, mate. So, where do I begin with MedTribe? So,
sales mode activated.
Yeah. Turn that on. So MedTribe, we are an event technology platform at the moment, and so we're tackling healthcare. And we are currently focusing on education within healthcare recruitment, within healthcare, and we're moving into healthcare recruitment as well. We are currently live in the UK, predominantly in England at the moment, but we do have users across other parts of the UK as well, and some internationally in America as well, but we're focused over there. So what we've done is we're tackling education within healthcare. So we've realized that there is, as healthcare professionals, they've got constant need to learn. It's like a weekly, if not daily, kind of occurrence I've got to do. And the management side of it is horrendous at the moment. Thousands of millions of pounds have been put into to admins really to run this process as a full-time job. And so we've identified a problem where we can actually streamline and help automate a lot of what goes on in the manual world. So as it stands, we've managed to get down a process from a couple of hours a week, I think, if someone says on one event, and they do like 10 or 20 events a week, to 30 minutes is what they've clocked it as to set up an event, and then set it up once and repeat over and over again. So we built this product from the ground up. There's just the three of us. We started it 2 years ago, like a part-time capacity, and in the last kind of 6 to 8 months, we've kind of gone real full-time with it. As I was saying before, we were successful to get into Techstars in London in the summer cohort last year. So I went over to London for a couple of trips, and we did that, which was fantastic. We've currently got nearly 12,000 users using us at the moment, so it's been a bit of slow growth, so to speak, but it's moving in the right direction. Quite a few NHS hospitals and trusts and hubs and things like that are using us now as well, so it's been fantastic. What we're looking to do moving forward, though, as I was mentioning, we're moving into recruitment. We've identified an opportunity on our platform where recruitment's a big problem, as you know, Chris, but in this case in healthcare. Interesting that we chose England or UK with the NHS and all of its woes. So it'd be an interesting space to see what we can do there. But we said there's a big opportunity there. And then depending on how we go there, we also want to look internationally as well, because healthcare recruitment internationally is a problem as well. What we've also identified, we've got a lot of problems, as you can see. What we tried to go for is we we believe that healthcare professionals don't have an online presence at the moment to showcase their skills, showcase their profiles, their education, and there is a need for that. And so the incumbents like LinkedIn don't get used. Even by LinkedIn stats, I believe it was 2017 or maybe 2020, I forgot which year it was, about 9% of healthcare professionals in the world use LinkedIn. So that leaves 91% with no presence. And so our vision is to be the place that healthcare professionals go globally for their education, for their recruitment, and their community activities. Pretty big vision we're brought into. And what I'm excited by it is a lot of what I talked about here today was being a technical co-founder, starting from literally ground zero. I built this thing with my own 2 hands, blood, sweat, and tears. But being able to get into things like Techstars London was great validation. We've got a fair number of users at the moment. I was very excited when we had our first 2 users. It was a eureka moment for me. But now we're into a little bit higher numbers, which is fantastic. And just all the wonderful things that comes with building a product. We do have the natural tendency and stresses around, we've got revenue and monetization, which is what we're looking to move into as well. So it's exciting times, but it's one of those peculiar times where it could be something or it could just fall over as well. So it's that risk reward kind of situation right now, which is both exciting and anxiety inducing.
It sounds it, mate. It sounds it. Kunal, thanks for taking the time to have a conversation, mate. Really enjoyed it. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's good chatting.
That's been great.